We're about to talk all about Lightburn with the man himself. Stick around. Earlier this month, I had the pleasure of sitting down and talking with the CEO and head software designer of Lightburn. During this interview, we discussed the history of Lightburn, what the challenges were in designing and marketing the software, as well as what was in store for the future of Lightburn. This interview was part of the Laser Livestream series, which brings together laser users from all around the world to share and discuss what they've been creating with their lasers. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you don't miss out on the next Laser Livestream. So finally, we've been able to kind of connect. I want to thank you, Jason, from... How are you doing, first of all? How's things going where you are?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great.
It's raining here, but other than that, we're good. And honestly, I like the rain. It's cooling off a little bit, which is nice.
You guys are in the middle of a heat wave, from what speaking to a lot of my friends in the US. Right now, we're starting winter, so we're literally the polar opposites.
Yeah, it's a little strange.
No, it's very cool. So Jason, if anyone's ever had gone onto the Lightburn, I was going to say the forums, asked for some help with Lightburn, you might have already come across Jason, but it's really interesting. You have another name that you use officially on those forums. So my first question is, can you tell us about this mysterious person called Oz?
Yes. So Oz is it's an inside joke. When I first started doing Lightburn, we had a beta group of users who were helping test and give feedback and so on. And I wasn't public about my involvement with Lightburn on Facebook and the forums, mostly because I kind of valued my privacy and wanted to stay hush-hush about it. And people in the beta group started calling me Oz as a nickname and as an in-joke because I was the man behind the curtain.
Don't look behind the curtain. There's nothing there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had a couple of other people say, the great and powerful. And I'm like, no. I'm not great and powerful, but I'll be the man behind the curtain. I have no problem with that. So yeah.
So we kind of broke it for everyone now. It's like everyone's going to know that Oz is Jason, and Jason is the I was going to say the brain trust, but it's like the man behind what we use, or if you use your laser every day, I definitely use it every day. The man behind the software that I use every day to make all my amazing projects. So first of all, thank you so much for putting this project together and supporting it the way it is. I personally love being able to create in Lightburn. I used a number of different pieces of software beforehand. I used software like CamBam, which was never designed for lasers. It was a more CNC piece of software. Laser Web, which is another thing that ran the laser, but it didn't actually allow me to create. I'd have to go into another piece of software, whether that was Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape. Anytime I want to make a change, I couldn't do it on the fly because the software only ran the laser, or if it had some sort of editing, it was really basic functionality. So really, since we got this opportunity to talk to you directly, I'm really curious, how did Lightburn come about initially?
Lightburn started because well, a little bit of background. I've been a maker for a long time. I've been a developer pretty much since the early 90s. Probably older than I look, but I started building things as a way to sort of do stuff that was not exactly the same as my day job. And so I got into CNC work. I built my own CNC machine.
Sure.
And so some of the software projects that you're talking about, like CamBam as an example, I've used before because I had a CNC machine and I used that. I also used Meshcam, I've used Vectric software, I've used Adobe, I've used Fusion, I've used SolidWorks, all of these different packages for modeling projects. I also do some 3D printing. Sure. And 3D printing and CNC kind of coexist well. There are some parts that you can do much faster on a CNC machine and some parts that are impossible to do on a CNC machine that are trivial on a 3D printer and so on. So I used to do all of these things. I got a new job and the new job was in a location that was different than where I was living, and the cost of living was about twice as high as where I was. So we had to downsize, and downsizing meant I had to give up my CNC machine, because my CNC machine was about the size of a car. And new place, yeah, it was a 4-foot by 5-foot cutting area.
I'm jealous.
It was huge.
I'm trying to work out how to get an Xcarve into my workspace. How did it's like
I'm jealous of past me. So if,
sure.
But so we moved, and I had to rehome my CNC machine. I gave it to a friend of mine who promised he'd keep it safe, and he uses it all the time now. So that's, I'm happy that somebody's getting their use out of it.
Awesome.
And I bought a laser, and I had originally been signed up for a Glowforge. And so in a way, Lightburn is, Glowforge is actually somewhat responsible for Lightburn, which is kind of a funny story in itself.
They must love that.
Maybe not, but...
you heard it here, folks. You heard it here first.
I was signed up for that. They slipped their first shipping date. It looked like they were going to slip their second shipping date. And then I found out that their software was cloud only and had no option for offline use. And I was looking at having the laser cutter in a garage without any web connectivity. And that just kind of ended it for me. I was like, I don't really think that's going to work for me.
Sure.
So started looking around online, found an eBay special red and black laser, one of the 700 by 500 millimeter 100-watt units for about half the price that you could get a Glowforge at the time. So I ordered that, and when it arrived, it came with RDWorks, which is the software that drives Ruida laser cutters. And it's very functional, but it's not very user-friendly. And it kind of looks like it was written for Windows 95 or maybe older. So
it's when you load it onto your new computer and it comes up with security warnings that you just kind of go, hang on a second, what?
Yeah, something's not right here. Anyway, I was able to make it work, and it's not terrible software. It's hard to fault it for what it is, because it does the job and it does it relatively well, and it's reasonably stable. But it's just not friendly. And at that time, it was significantly worse. They have actually improved it quite a bit since then. This was probably 2016, early 2017.
Right. Yeah.
So I was able to make it do what I needed it to. And then I tried to show my girlfriend how to use it. She's a graphic designer by trade. She's used to working with things like InDesign and Adobe Illustrator and very polished software packages. And she tried to use it. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, she was just like, get this away from me. This is terrible. So I started poking at kind of, what would be required to replace this. Is it possible to make completely independent software that talks to this machine in its native language? And I just started kind of pulling at threads and poking at things and looking at their file format and looking for resources that I could find online. And there wasn't much out there, but there was a little bit, some early work that other people had done to sort of figure out what some of the command set was. And so starting with the little bit that existed back then, I was able to, at first, just take one of the existing files that I saved for my laser and rearrange the cuts and then save it back out. And the laser accepted that data. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that worked. And just kind of kept building from there, and then started writing a front end on it and adding, some basic graphics abilities, basic line drawing, that kind of thing. And while I was doing this, I was a member of a couple of Facebook groups for laser cutting enthusiasts, people who help one another, lots of different groups on Facebook for that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I started posting images or short video clips of the stuff that I was working on. And fairly quickly, people were like, what is that? What are you going to do with that? Can I have that? That's pretty cool. Do you have a Facebook page for that? Can we follow it? And as the more that happened, the more I began to realize that there was a niche or a need that wasn't being filled here, and thought maybe I could fill it. And I wasn't sure if it was going to work, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to even fully communicate with the controller. But before long, we had it actually working, or I had it actually working. I keep saying we because it's force of habit. I've always referred to Lightburn as a company, we.
That's okay.
But initially it was myself and my girlfriend, and that was it. It was just me, and we had a couple of people who helped with support, and really that was it.
I think it's really interesting, as you explain that, two things really jumped out at me. One is that normally, your first introduction to like laser cutting software was really more kind of an engineering manufacturing front, as opposed to a maker kind of need, right? So it's one thing to run a machine, and if you're in industry, once you've got the files, you just run those files, right? You just run them over and over again. You do that task, you got no problems, right? As long as the machine works. And I have a sneaking suspicion those early laser driving software, I don't even want to call it laser design software because I don't think it really was that, was really based upon that. Once you worked out what you needed to do, it just ran. It was a sausage factory type thing. It's just you keep running the file and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I feel like more recently, as the cost of the tech has come down and it's become more ubiquitous, and I mentioned Glowforge earlier. One of the things that they did do that I think that they did well was they kind of commoditized lasers, and they brought them to a wider audience, and they made them more approachable for a lot of people who would otherwise be overwhelmed or afraid to try something like this. They made them friendly. Something that I have a great deal of respect for, Apple, as an example, as a company, has made computing more accessible for a lot of people.
Very true.
So you can poo-poo them for being expensive or whatever. I'm not going to get into an Apple versus PC kind of fanboy debate, but when my father, who was a computer illiterate, asked what kind of computer he should get because he wanted to be able to post on Facebook and read the internet, I told him to get an Apple. Because it's an appliance. You plug it in and it works. You don't have to edit your registry. You don't have to mess with a lot of things. They generally just behave themselves. And Glowforge, for whatever other faults and warts they may have, I feel like they are similar in that respect, that they brought a laser cutting machine to the world that is relatively plug and play, relatively easy to use, and it's much more approachable than what was coming out of China or even locally, domestically at the time.
Right. I mean, it's very interesting because my personal philosophy is it's all about experience. That's why we even do the live stream here. It's because there's a lot of people working on this technology that are producing amazing results, but by combining it as part of a community, we actually get to share our knowledge and have a better experience, a greater experience than just being by ourselves. And I agree with you. I think Glowforge really was that kind of, experience for people to go, hey, maybe I can dip my toe in it. The idea of being able to work in their user interface was definitely something that people were like, okay, we're moving away from the manufacturing. We now have got more of a bespoke, I can take a design and then I can change it if it doesn't work and go straight through without having to go through multiple steps, which is, again, something that I really think that Lightburn does extremely well. But it's also interesting the parallels when you were telling that story. I worked for a library here who had a makerspace, quite a large makerspace, and I fought tooth and nail to get a laser in. Originally, we put a order in for Glowforge, and they kept missing their dates. And the problem was that because it was a local council, we had to have the machine by a certain date. Otherwise, it kind of pings all these audit things. It's like, maybe it was like
funding requirements or that kind of thing.
100%. By the end of that financial year, we had to have the equipment there and prove that we spent the money. Otherwise, they're going to be like, we're going to audit you for fraud. And I'm like, it's not fraud, it's Kickstarter. I mean, it's like, hey guys,
we don't really have a lot of control over this.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I mean, so what ended up happening actually, and again, it was a roundabout thing because by the time, that library got the laser, I had actually moved to another project. And then I went back in and I'm like, in Blazor? Awesome. Like, I didn't think you guys would even be thinking about that because, they were all like, it has to be the best. It has to be the latest thing. So it's kind of funny how we both started with that idea of getting
that machine and then
that machine
moved away from it. Yeah.
Right. I know that there's a lot of people right now in the in in the Glowforge community who are kind of holding their breath because of the fact that the software is web-based. And we've already seen last year another product that decided to change their web-based access, and thankfully they listened to their community and were able to move it back. But I think that once you roll those dice and it's out there, sooner or later, it becomes another kind of flow of it's a revenue stream of sorts. And I think it just breaks my heart that it's not just about the equipment; it's about the experience and the functionality. And
for me, it's not just about them continuing to hold the keys. That's part of it, certainly. Sure. But prior to TiVo, so everybody knows what TiVo is.
Not in Australia. Surprisingly enough, we don't have them here in Australia.
I might also be dating myself by this, but so there was an appliance that was meant for recording television channels, sure, and it was called TiVo. And predating TiVo was a piece of equipment called a Replay TV.
Yes.
And they were, I believe they were the first. They might not have actually been the first, but they were the first that was meant for recording television shows off of your television and using the cable TV schedule to pick, which things you were going to record and so on. But their service required, or using the machine required you to have a subscription to their service. Mm-hmm. And that was how it got the channel listings and so on. But it was also how the machine knew that it was active. And so if you didn't pay your subscription fee, the machine just bricked. Not a hard bricking, it just stopped working.
Yep.
So Replay got sued because of commercial skipping. Effectively, they allowed you to skip commercials at the press of a button, and it had this sort of automatic feature in it. Advertisers didn't like that, went after them, tied them up in litigation for a long time, and eventually Replay just disappeared.
Sure.
And so I was left with a very pretty paperweight. And having that experience, when I found out that Glowforge's software was online only and always going to be web-based with no offline option, it kind of brought that back to mind. Sure. Oh, well, what happens if Glowforge doesn't survive? What happens if, my internet connection goes down? What happens if their servers go down? What happens if, they publish a bug accidentally? It happens.
Yeah.
So you're kind of at the whims of them and their schedule as opposed to yours. If they have an update and they post it and it's not stable, you're probably getting it shoved down your throat instead of being able to just pick and choose which updates you want. So I tend to prefer the more traditional offline software approach. And we've modeled Lightburn in that way. Lightburn is an offline application. It does not require an internet connection to use. We don't require you to update. And it's a lifetime license. If you purchase it, you don't get updates forever, but you do get to use the software forever. And if we as a company ever go dark for whatever reason, I'll probably just remove the licensing option altogether and publish one last version so that everybody can just have it.
Awesome.
Hopefully it never comes to that.
No, but I do not want that to happen. Just, on that's something else that I definitely want to touch upon is the fact that this piece of software, you're working on it, you're refining it constantly. The amount of updates in the last couple of years that I've seen within Lightburn, and I'm not just talking about software updates, I'm talking about functionality updates. You've taken anyone with a laser cutter who's using Lightburn, right, initially just got an amazing piece of software that would run your laser and allow you to create within that piece of software. Well, now I'm doing things with functions like print and cut that I never thought. I thought I'd have to buy a completely separate piece of machinery. I thought that I'd have to go and get a vinyl cutter, or not that you do not cut vinyl in your laser cutter, but
not in your laser.
That idea of like a plotter with a knife on it to cut, let's say, stickers out, or die cut paper. One of the things that I loved before I got my laser was paper models. And paper models, you have to sit there with a scalpel and cut them all out manually, which is great, but it takes a lot of time.
It's time consuming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's tedious and it's inaccurate, and yeah.
Absolutely.
I've done it.
Sure. And one of the things that I was looking at was another product that would just basically be like a vinyl cutter that would just cut the paper for me, right? Well, the laser can do that now, and not only that,
Hmm.
you can also set up like your Lightburn job so that it'll score the piece of paper, and you can fold. It's almost like the ability to take the laser and actually push the envelope of what it traditionally can do to something new is phenomenal, and that's due to the software that's running it. It's not there's nothing's changing in my Blazor. It's not like the guys at Darkly Labs are going, hey Gil, here's a little chip, you put it in the back and now we can die
Right.
cut and you can do all that sort of stuff. It's due to the brain, or the if you think of the whole system as a nervous system, the brain is Lightburn and the body is in Blazor. It's like the brain just learned a new trick, and that is something that I see constantly happening with your software.
It's funny that you mentioned scoring and paper folding, because that was one of the very, very first things that I ever did with a laser.
Okay.
And in fact, even before I had my first laser, I had a silhouette cutting machine, a little
Yep.
vinyl cutter.
Absolutely.
I still have it, but my girlfriend and I, as I mentioned, I'm a maker and have been for a long time. We were making soap, and we were cutting cardboard boxes to put the soap in, and we'd cut the little bands and print them to wrap around the soap for the branding and so on. And I bought the silhouette cutting machine so that I could cut out boxes, but I had also decided to try it with a small diode laser. And so I built a little one of the little kits that you can buy with about a 2.5 watt diode laser on it. And trying to get the laser to do scoring at that time was
Sure.
difficult, because it wouldn't do, you couldn't adjust the power just right. You'd either end up cutting not enough or cutting too much or whatever. And it really needed to be able to do a perforation. And it was difficult to make it do that. And with the silhouette die cutting machine, we were able to adjust the pressure to get the scoring lines to work. But even that was, kind of hit and miss sometimes. Sure. So perforation mode exists in Lightburn because I had used,
Awesome.
Because I had been trying to do papercraft in the past, and I wanted the ability to do that. And, so a lot of the feature set in Lightburn comes from things that I've either used myself in the past or have missed or wanted. And print and cut was one of those things where it was like, hey, I want to be able to print a thing and then cut it out of acrylic or paper or whatever. Be able to take a vinyl sticker that I've cut on a silhouette machine or a Cricut or something like that,
Sure.
put it onto a physical object, and then cut out that physical object and have everything line up. So yeah, it's interesting when you have that experience of being a maker. Absolutely. And you are restricted in the kinds of tools that you have or the functions that you have in your software. It's frustrating, and you end up trying to find creative ways to work around things. But as a developer, I'm looking at this as opportunities for, hey, what can I add to Lightburn? What am I doing with this right now that, I could do differently or easier if I had better tools?
Absolutely.
And
I love the fact that you're a maker. I mean, I do identify as a maker myself, and being in the projects, working hands-on. And again, look, there are companies out there, they make laser cutters because that's their focus. But I wonder how many of the people who are making the decisions are the ones who are also using that equipment and that software to actually create things. And I think that's one of the things that puts yourself and Lightburn ahead of the rest, is that you are a maker, you're constantly working on projects. You've also got the ability to go, hey, I can do this on this. Hey, maybe that's a function we can roll into the software, which I love. I mean, I really do love that. I believe if you've got 3 pieces of equipment in your shop, you've got a bespoke workshop. For me, it's a 3D printer, a laser cutter, and I haven't got one, but I want to add on my wish list a vac former, because that'll allow me to create multiples very, very quickly. And that's my kind of trilogy of machines that I would love to have. There are some now small kind of desktop unit vac formers that I'm looking at, and hopefully we'll be able to go and play with one, and then also work out recommendations for that, because I see other makers also going down that line of we create one-offs, bespoke one-off pieces.
For things like prop pieces or stuff where you're making
absolutely
where you're replicating something a lot, a vac former works really well for those kinds of things.
well.
I know a friend of mine made one because he wanted to make his own stormtrooper costume.
That I think there's more people who want to play with a vac former because of the hard plastic stormtrooper suits that has become made famous for generations. I think the very first time I ever saw a vac former was exactly that project. As an 18-year-old, I was like, okay, I'm going to build that, and then
If you're familiar with Game of Drones, I don't know if that rings any bells for you or not, but some friends of mine started a drone combat thing.
Oh wow! Okay.
And they made drone bodies out of vacuum formed kydex.
Yep.
And they had me CNC their first couple of plugs to use on the vacuum forming. They initially did it with just like, they had a couple of shot glasses and a few pieces of 2x4 and so on. And they creatively arranged them to get the body shape that they wanted.
Right.
And then my friend was a visual effects artist for the movie and film industry for a long time. And so he's familiar with ZBrush and a lot of other modeling packages like that. So he modeled up what he wanted it to look like.
Awesome.
Gave me that design. I used my CNC machine to cut him a plug out of wood, and they vacuum formed that. And that was their first drone body.
Awesome.
And then they, sent that off to actually have it like fully manufactured and had a couple thousand of them made. And they did a Kickstarter for it.
Oh, that's, you see, and I love those sort of stories. To me, that's what it's all about, because I know what I make it all the time, right? But it's hearing the other things that people are going to make that inspires me to go, hey, you know what, instead of going this direction, why don't we just go a little bit this direction and see what happens? And it's awesome. But let's bring it back to Lightburn. That's why we got, I love talking about all these different projects and how they accumulate. No, that's the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh no,
how they all just
accumulate is a good word.
They do accumulate. They absolutely.
I have
do.
a habit of collecting hobbies. So.
You're not the only one. You should see. Right now, we've been in lockdown because of the COVID outbreak in Australia, and thankfully, my amazing partner is allowed me to take over the one bathroom we have in our apartment and turn it into an airbrushing studio, because I decided I want to learn how to use an airbrush. Okay. And I'm getting some great results, and she's been wonderful about it. But I also know I've got to, it's that accumulation of the more skills you have, the more you can apply.
Yeah.
So, but bringing it back to Lightburn, you did touch on this briefly. When did you realize Lightburn was like a viable product that the laser community kind of wanted?
Probably, I would say kind of early to mid 2017.
Okay.
In and around there anyway. It started, as I mentioned, it started just for myself. It was a thing that I was doing for me and for my girlfriend, because she hated RDWorks. I didn't hate it, but I didn't particularly like it either. It wasn't enjoyable to work with.
Yep.
And there were things that it did that just felt clunky or cumbersome, or that I thought could probably be done better. And so, as I said before, I started kind of pulling at threads and figuring out, how it worked, how it talked, and building it up that way. And as I was posting in Facebook groups that I was in, other people started asking about it, asking, is this something that you're going to sell? Are you going to give it away? Is it going to be open source? How do we follow it? How do we find information about it? That kind of thing. And the more that happened, the more I realized that we had something that people might want. And so my girlfriend and I started talking about names. Like Lightburn initially started as J Laser, just Jason's laser project, it didn't have a name. It was just trash. And so, we had to come up with a name for it. We had to come up with a logo or branding or something like that. The initial logo for Lightburn was just the text with like the little rotate handle in a corner.
Oh, sweet.
And then while watching an episode of Game of Thrones where Drogo the dragon comes swooping over a crowd of knights and a battle, there's a big open field battle, and one of the dragons comes swooping in and lights up an entire row of people on fire. And I made a joke along the lines of, oh man, that beam's got a hell of a curve. And I started laughing, and then I stopped and I looked at my girlfriend. She looked at me and we're like, dragon, we could use a dragon for the logo.
Awesome.
And so the whole thing kind of was happenstance and chance
Sure.
and that sort of thing, and just like little random mental blips here and there. And it's all worked out phenomenally well. And it had no, like, it was never planned. We didn't plan any of this. It was just, a thing I started for myself. And as people got interested, we put together a website and a Facebook page, gave it a name, gave it a logo, and started figuring out whether or not this would actually be a viable thing or not. And as I said, I kept my name out of it. I just wanted it to be a brand and not something that I was personally tied to, because I figured if it took off, I didn't want to be bombarded with Facebook messages and friend requests from random people who wanted to ask me for support, things like
Sure.
that. That's happening more lately now that I'm more public about my involvement. But yeah, it's we started selling it early 2018, and it started as a trickle, and it's been growing since.
What I love about this story is the fact that it flowed so just naturally. It just completely flowed into the space that it is today, which is awesome. So it sounds like you developed this. Personally, I want to just call Lightburn now J Laser from now on. But I don't think, if you haven't seen this, it would be like, what's Gil talking? There's another thing Gil's talking about, J Laser. What's going on? No, I won't do that to you. I promise you, I won't do that to you. But it sounds like you were off on a trickle. Then you started building some great support. There were people who were really interested in it. What was like the biggest challenge that you had to bring Lightburn to where it is today?
It's well, when I started it, I had a day job.
Right,
So it was a hobby initially, and like any hobby, it was sort of a passion project, and it was a thing that I did on my own on evenings and weekends, things like that. And so I would say that it probably tested my girlfriend's patience as much as anything else.
Sure.
And it was borderline obsession for a while there, because it was a thing that I was doing for me as well as for her. And, just, hey, I want this thing to be easy to use. I want it to be fast. I want it to be fun. And I would just add all kinds of functions that I wanted from other software packages that I had, and trying to figure out how to make those work. And I was also the only developer. So initially, in addition to having a day job, I was doing this thing for myself as a hobby project. And then it just kind of got out of hand. And so I left the day job. I started doing this full time. We released the software out into the wild. We've taken a lot of user feedback. Keeping up with just feature requests and support, I would say, has been probably the biggest challenge. Right. I've got a lot of development experience, and I don't have a problem with that side of things. But as the software has grown in popularity, keeping up with support challenges and that side of it has gotten harder and harder. So we've been hiring people to help with that side of it. And G-Code is the other one. So right. Lightburn initially was for Ruida and Ruida controllers, which are DSP based. They're binary. And when you buy a Ruida based laser, it comes from a factory. They've already set it up. They assembled it. They configured it. They've done all of the work for you. A lot of the users who are using G-Code systems, unlike the Emblazer, are getting a kit. So they get something that they have to assemble themselves. And so not only does the user have relatively minimal experience in most cases, they've, often this is their first experience with a laser.
Sure.
They're assembling it themselves. And so when they come asking for help, you have to figure out, so is it something that went wrong during the assembly? Is it something that's physically wrong with the device? Is it a software issue? Is it a hardware issue? Is it a user issue? Is it a configuration problem? Is it, electrical noise, gremlins? There's all kinds of things that can and do go wrong with these. And diagnosing what the problem is when you are working with somebody who barely even speaks the language of the machine, or they're not even used to the terms to use yet, things like that can be challenging.
Sure.
So no fault of their own, obviously. I mean, if you buy something, a lot of the companies that sell these machines are based in China. So you're looking at, a 12 to 16 hour time difference with the North American users where we are. and there's a language barrier. So often the documentation has been translated. Sometimes the translations aren't good. Sometimes they're terrible, frankly. But so you've got all of this stuff that's throwing a little bit of extra sauce into the mix that makes it fun. So
I'm just curious, since there are, two things that come to mind, but the first one is, what's your experience been with the users of Lightburn generally? Just as there's always someone who might get frustrated and kind of think that, this isn't doing what I wanted to do. But generally, given the fact that there is a real strong maker presence within the Lightburn universe, and now it's definitely being used by a lot of kind of just people who only use lasers for, let's say, work or hobby businesses and all the rest of it. What generally, how do you find kind of the requests and interactions with users?
I would say overall the reception has been really good.
Amazing.
There are holdouts. There are people who have who've been in the space far longer than I have. For example, there are people who've been working with Ruida controllers pretty much since Ruida came out, and working with other hardware before that. And I got my first laser in 2017. So it's, to say that I'm an expert would be, I don't know, it'd be completely incorrect. I've learned an awful lot, and I learn quickly, but there's nothing to replace that level of experience. If somebody's been doing this 20 or 30 years,
for sure,
they're going to bring more to the table than I will. And so a lot of people who have been doing it for a long time, they are used to the software that they have, and they're sort of stuck in their way of working. They might see Lightburn as being a little bit too cartoonish or friendly or cutesy. The icons have a particular look and feel to them. I tried to make the software not look clunky and functional, but look a little bit more playful. And that was a design choice, and maybe that turns some people off. But I would say overall, the reception has been really good. People have been mostly great about it. We occasionally get somebody who's frustrated because they've managed to find a corner somewhere that crashes regularly for whatever kind of workflow they're doing. We have occasionally people who will do a very specific thing. They get a laser because they want to do, this one specific thing. And so that's the rabbit hole they go down. And for whatever reason, nobody's ever tested that code path, and it breaks. And so I get an angry email saying, your software is crap and it doesn't do the thing I want to do. And we try to talk them down and figure out, okay, how do we reproduce this problem? How can we make it crash here so that we can figure out why it's crashing? Something that I feel helps set Lightburn apart from other software projects is that we do try to be very responsive to crashes and bugs. If somebody submits a crash, we take those fairly seriously. We prioritize those above most feature requests. And we try to do releases often.
Yes, absolutely.
And, not just to pile on new features, but also to address things that people have found at, both feature requests and crashes or bug fixes.
Absolutely. If you're enjoying this interview with Jason from Lightburn, take a moment to support these interviews and live streams by hitting the subscribe button and bell icon. And don't forget to come and join us when we're live. We'd love to hear about what you've been creating. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I first came across Lightburn was the fact that people were buying cheap Chinese CO2-based lasers and removing the electronic component so that they were compatible with Lightburn. And that was the first thing that when I heard about the software, going, that's a lot of work, right? People were buying G-code controller boards so that they were compatible to use Lightburn. And I think there's a lot of documentation out there for people who are interested in it. It's not a small task at all. It's actually quite
it's gotten easier. I think a few years ago when we first started, it was much harder.
Sure.
But there have been the two that spring to mind are Cohesion 3D, their laser board, and Awesome Tech's mini gerbil board. Those two are meant to be drop-in replacements for K40, the stock. Like, I assume the one you're talking about is the K40.
That's
this is like the ubiquitous 40-watt laser that you buy on Amazon for about $350 to $400 US. And it comes with a control board that we don't support. The command set is quite limited. And there are now projects like K40 Whisperer and Meerkat, which will directly support that board as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they don't have the editing facilities that Lightburn has. You still need to have something like Inkscape or CorelDRAW or Illustrator to do the design work.
Absolutely.
And then you bring your design into those packages and you can run the laser from there. But if you want a little more control over the laser power, if you want to be able to use G-code, if you want to be able to use Lightburn or LaserWeb or other software packages, you have to put a board in that will run G-code. And so these add-ons have been designed to be like bolt compatible and plug compatible with the existing controller. So quite literally, you just unplug the old one, plug the new one in, connect up the cables and power it up, and you're off and running.
And you say you're not an expert. I mean, look, I know, you just, I remember it being like literally you had to splice cables and you had to get plugs. It was quite a task. But it's great to see that. Well, two things. One is there's a need, therefore it's created a market, and it's also supporting Lightburn. I'm also curious, Jason, how many lasers do you have access to right now?
Oh gosh, in this room, one.
Well, hold on. You just got a whole lot of people going in this room. In this room, I have one laser. You still in this room? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So where I am right now is the office above my shop.
Sure.
And so in this room, so I'm going to try to look in where, okay, so that thing let's see where my finger is here. Right there.
Yep.
Okay, so that is called an engravinator.
Okay.
My friend Adam Haley designed that. It is a very, very cute little 8-bit diode laser with an 8-bit controller.
Oh, sweet.
It's got 130 millimeter square area, so you can use it to engrave coasters and stuff like that. But it's meant to be more of a showpiece or a test piece.
Sure.
And it's a full 2D control setup and linear rails and the whole bit, and it's all made with aluminum extrusion. I use that one for testing G-code devices.
Sweet.
This other thing, where is it? Right. Oh, I'm moving the wrong way. The orange thing right there.
Yep.
That's a test harness.
Okay.
It's basically a tower with 4 little motors on it and 4 belts with little position things and limit switches. And the top of it has a bunch of LEDs on it. And I can plug that in and make it pretend it's a laser. And so I have a whole bunch of control boards for lasers. I've probably got about 30 controllers in my office now that are all set up so that they're configured basically the same way. They have a DB25 connector on them, which is yeah. Sorry, I'm okay. trying to grab a laser controller over here, but it's too far away. A DB25 is an old school printer port.
Yep.
And so you plug in a laser controller with an old school printer port, and I can swap the controller in any of my lasers out by just unplugging a port and plugging it back into a new controller.
Awesome.
And so the engravinator thing, it is configured in the same way. So I can plug a laser controller into that and test it. But I've got probably a dozen diode lasers, including Ortour, Two Trees, Elix Maker. I've got an Elix Draw, which is a little plotting device. I've got 2 K40s. One of them is modified with better linear rails and a nicer lens arrangement and so on. And then one of the stock standard ones that you get on Amazon. I've got 2 fiber lasers. I've got a Thunder Laser Nova 24. I've got an Aeon Mira 7, and I now have an OM Tech dual head 80-watt laser that was just delivered a few days ago, and
wow.
it's the big beast.
Wow. I'm telling you, it's Laser Central. It's a Laser Central down at your place. Yeah. If they ever decide they're going to do that kind of Star Wars laser defense system, it's got to be run by Lightburn, and maybe you can
I need a lot of hardware for testing. And we have, I actually have a few others that are not yet supported, and so I probably shouldn't announce. But in addition to that, I've got a QBO sitting on the chair behind me. that one I'm just starting to get into the control protocol for. So they've been good about it and giving us information. I've got an in Blazor, obviously. Darkly Labs was one of the earliest companies to have Lightburn provided as their software. And so, in fact, I think they were the first. And so we've had a good partnership with them from pretty early on when I was just getting started.
Awesome.
I added G-code support to Lightburn and had been playing around with a couple of small G-code boards. And then I did a web search looking for who had lasers that were running on G-code boards, and Darkly Labs' name came up. And I sent them an email and said, hey, would you be willing to try this piece of software with your hardware just to see how it works? And if it does, then I can just, put another checkbox on the box to say, hey, it's also supported by this laser. And they said, sure. And the next day I got an email, can we call you? And it went from there. So they had been using LaserWeb.
Yes, they definitely have been.
LaserWeb at the time was one of the relatively few open source laser software control projects that existed that would run G-code controllers and was made for lasers and for CO2 machines. Lasers and CNC machines, pardon me.
That's correct.
Messing that up. They weren't happy with the performance and they weren't happy with the responsiveness of the development team. Because LaserWeb was an open source project, the developers don't get paid. They do things because they want to. It's their sort of pet project, but they don't have a great deal of incentive to be responsive to customers because they're not being paid for it. It's sort of their pet project, not for everyone else, it's for them. And it was JavaScript running inside a browser, interpreted code on your own machine, whereas Lightburn is written to be fast. I was a game developer for 25 years, and so I've written low-level assembly code and like hand-optimized, loving little routines to make things as fast as possible. And Lightburn shows a lot of that as well. It's a compiled software application that runs on your native hardware. Is not interpreted, it's not running in Python or JavaScript or anything. It is really fast. And that's one of the driving things that I wanted Lightburn to be, as I wanted it to be fast and just not be in your way.
Sure, absolutely. You can see that with the when you use even you amended the file type to create smaller files, and even that
so they load faster and save faster, and
I mean,
we had one user who had a file that was like a dumping ground for projects, and he showed it to me. The before version of his file was about 155 megabytes, and the after version was a little less than 8. And he posted on our forum, and he was like, I don't know what this is, but as far as I'm concerned, it's magic.
Right. I mean, again, they're the little touches that I have a directory full of my Lightburn projects. And then as I've been going in and as I've been loading the old projects up, they've been changing them, and that file size just keeps shrinking down. I'm like, I can keep this all on my laptop. I don't need to keep it on my NAS anymore. It's awesome. So, we're talking about a lot of different things that Lightburn has kind of evolved into. Is there a function or something that you're really proud of that you were able to achieve in Lightburn?
I think there are probably two. My two favorites would be the offsetting tool. I guess it's three favorites. So offsetting is probably my favorite, and that was one of the earlier ones that we had. That was something that we had in Lightburn almost from the beginning, and it's hugely powerful.
Yeah.
And it was something that really annoyed the heck out of me with RDWorks. So in RDWorks, if you drew a circle and another circle and they overlapped and you offset them, you would get an offset around the first circle and an offset around the second circle, and those new offsets would overlap. And what I wanted was an offset around, the outline of the whole thing.
Sure.
And if you were offsetting text, as an example, you would get each letter independently offset instead of now having your text inside a little island that surrounded it. And the offsetting engine in Lightburn is based on a library called Clipper that is open source and free. and it does a fantastic job of the offsetting. And so that's what we use. It's very fast. It does a very good job. It's quite robust, and it produces the offsets that I want and the way that they look. And we use that same tool for the Boolean operations, which are welding, Boolean union, subtraction, difference, and just how those are set up in Lightburn. I really like the way that they work.
Yep.
So offset and welding, or offsetting, and the Boolean tools are probably my two favorites. And then the bending handle in text, I think, is my next one.
Okay.
So that one's more recent. We had initially done text on a path. We had a lot of people ask, I want to be able to wrap my text around a shape, around a circle, around a something. And the way it was phrased, everybody always asked for the ability to put text on a path. And so that's the first one that we did. And then everybody said, oh, this is great, but I don't want to keep the path. And we noticed that every time anybody ever said they were having trouble with text on a path and how it was being used, they were just wrapping it around a circle. It's all they were doing. Like I would say the 95% case was people putting text around a circle. And so I started kind of banging my head against things, thinking, how can I make this easier? Because it should be simple. It's just an arc, but I wanted it to be intuitive. And that's another one of those driving things behind Lightburn, is that I want the software to be fluid and interactive and intuitive. I want it to work the way you think it should. And it doesn't always, and some people find that there are many options in the user interface, and it can be a little overwhelming if you're a new user. But as you get more and more familiar with it, it just flows. And I really like that flow. And I find that software that gets in my way when I'm trying to do things just frustrates me. And so I'm constantly adding things like hotkeys, shortcut keys, different ways of doing the same thing, putting things in multiple places, stuff like that, and trying to come up with ways to do things that are just clean. And the little bend dot for text in Lightburn is one of my favorite examples of that, because it's, you create a piece of text, you click to select it, you grab the little blue dot and you pull, and it just, and the text bends. And I've actually had a number of users come back and say, I've been an Illustrator user or a Corel user, or pick your software package, for a decade. And this is the easiest text bending tool that I've ever seen. It's just, I don't know why everybody else isn't doing it this way. So that made me pretty happy.
That's awesome. One of the functions that I learned about very early on in Lightburn, that I would actually just load up Lightburn, use this function, then kind of export out, was the trace function. For me, that was like the biggest game changer in my life when it came to kind of working out a vector. I tried Inkscape, I had tried Illustrator, I had tried so many things, and it just works so nicely and so cleanly in Lightburn. And of course, as I started applying the trace function into more things, I would actually keep it in the projects. But I love to be able to go and grab something. So I remember grabbing my company logo and just going, I want to engrave that onto this thing that I'm working on. And I was like, okay, I can, I looked at it, I ran the simulation, the preview, and went, oh, that just upped my project by like 4 hours. And I'm like, okay, hang on a second. What if I did it as a line drawing? What if I just engraved it in? And I was like, hey, I can trace it. I'm sure that you probably, behind the scenes, there's probably something going on there. I'm assuming that you didn't have to create that trace function from scratch. What's so
funny is, what's kind of funny is that I've heard this before, that the trace feature in Lightburn is, people like it. It's relatively easy to use. It's relatively intuitive, and it's quick. What's amusing to me is that it is using the tracing engine that is in Inkscape. The tracing engine in Inkscape is called PoTrace. It's made by a guy named Peter Selinger, I think, who runs a company called Icosasoft up in Canada. And he has it set up so that you can use it in an open source project like Inkscape, or you can commercially license it, which is what we do.
Sure.
And the code is the same. It's the same engine. It's the same everything as Inkscape is using. We just have it, like, I put a different user interface on it, and
Oh,
that's
I mean,
kind of the key.
I've used Inkscape so often, exclusively before I got involved with Lightburn and started using the software. I could never get it to do a clean trace the way it does in Lightburn. And again, this kind of makes the point, and this is what I think kind of steps Lightburn away from some of the other software. And it really is. It's all about the experience. It's all about, how do I get into the software, create what I want to create, and keep moving, as opposed to getting into the software, then working out exactly what it is, locking it in, and then that's the only option that I have. And just recently, I think it was the last live stream that we did, we actually went through tracing. We went through all the different options and how you can use it, and how you could trace something, and then if you needed to clean it up, you can ungroup it, and sometimes you get double lines or whatever, the settings aren't as tuned in, and what all the different functions do, including all the different node points and how to clean those up within. I would never have thought that it was the same kind of trace engine as in Lightburn. And what really that's a testament to is the focus you have, maybe as a maker or as a game designer, understanding that there's more to it than just putting functionality in there. It's all about, how does someone come in who doesn't have any experience, or maybe a little bit intimidated.
When I was in game development, one of the principal things that was part of my job was creating tools for artists to get their work into video games. So I worked on NBA 2K for when did I start? Probably 2005 or 2006.
Sure.
And so I would have worked on that project for about 12 or 14 years. And it was just, every year we do a new version. And before that, I worked on a number of other software games as well. But the NBA 2K project was probably the longest running one and the best known one. But I was responsible for a lot of tools that allowed the artists to get their 3D models into the game, to get their textures into the game, creating the front end and menus, all of that kind of thing. Artists aren't technical most of the time.
Sure.
And there are technical artists who do things like very, very complicated character rigs and so on, but they're not engineers, and they're not programmers, and they don't necessarily think the same way that engineers and software programmers do. And working with them for several decades has taught me a lot about how people who are creative work, or like to work, the kinds of workflows that they use, and how they like information presented to them. And I can't necessarily say that Lightburn is the absolute best at all of that, but I've definitely tried to make it present information in a way that people who are creative will find useful or palatable. And interactivity is a strong part of that, making things that are sliders and buttons that you can move and tweak and have the software respond in real time, or as close to real time as possible. That's something that I try to do. And when you send a job to the Laser, getting the job sorted and optimized and get the cut plan done quickly and as quickly as possible. So that was something that, going back to Darkly Labs for a moment, one of the early complaints from Dominic at Darkly Labs was that LaserWeb took a very long time to load files in.
Right.
And it took a very long time to generate the G code for files when you were sending them to the machine. And so that was an early focus of Lightburn, was loading files quickly, being able to navigate your files quickly, which actually LaserWeb does as well. They do a good job of that. But then generating the G code in Lightburn, when I first sent it to Dominic, he thought it was broken because he hit the button to say go, and the machine started moving immediately. And he's like, oh, that was weird. So when did you generate the G code? Were you doing that in the background after it was loaded? And I was like, no, it was when you hit the start button. And he's like, but there was no discernible time between when I hit the start button and when the machine started running. And I was like, well, you drew a circle. there shouldn't be any discernible time. It's a circle.
Right.
Like,
Right. I mean, again, you know, that experience that you had before. First of all, I'm sure there's people going, "I love that game. Oh my gosh, Jason's the guy who worked on that. Oh my, you know, the cult of NBA." But definitely, you know, it shows, it shines again. It's something that, you know, I've had people kind of send me messages after watching the live stream. They're like, "You're a shill. You just say that because, you know, those guys." And I'm like, "No, man. If you go back for, you know, before I was talking about this piece of software before because I really loved it." And again, I think that if you're creating a hardware either for a STEM or a maker community, there's a lot to be learned here, because it's not just about functions. Functions are not just the key. It's about how do people go in and be able to create. And that's, again, something that's really close to my heart and why I do what I do. Jason, just a final question for you. I know this is going to be broad, so, you know, don't spill the beans all at once, but what's next for Lightburn as far as you're concerned? Where do you want to see Lightburn going, and what's in the future for Lightburn as a company and the software?
We are growing as a company. So I mentioned that when Lightburn started, it was really just me and my girlfriend. We are now up to 9 people.
Awesome.
So not all of them full-time, but we've got, including myself, 5 full-time developers, 5. Joe, Adam, Justin, myself. So 4 full-time developers, 1 part-time developer, and then a couple of support people, our shipping person, who is my girlfriend, Sarah. My girlfriend has a name. Her name is Sarah.
You don't want to give too much information out. I'm telling you, it's going to come back at you.
And then I'm actually working on hiring a friend of mine to come on as sort of our business manager and CEO.
Awesome.
We're going to co-run the company for a while, but I want to be able to move back into more development, be able to focus on development more, because that's my core strength. And I have been the one kind of wearing all of the hats, running the company, doing some of the support, doing lead development, all of the reverse engineering of protocols and controls of the laser cutting and stuff like that is all on my shoulders as well. And it's just a lot to keep up with.
Oh, understandable.
And so we're growing the team. We're going to be bringing on that friend of mine to help me run the company and eventually take over sort of the day-to-day running of things, so that I can focus on development. I've started working on support for vinyl cutters.
Nice.
So that's something that I would eventually like to see Lightburn grow into more of a platform for digital fabrication machines, regardless of what type of machine that is. If you've got a piece of hardware that is effectively a 2D plotter with a tool on it, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to drive that.
Amazing.
So whether that is a pen plotter or a vinyl cutting blade, a water jet, plasma cutter, and eventually CNC machine.
I was waiting for that. I was like, is CNC going to be in there? Oh my gosh, that would be like, so you have no idea.
That one will be further down the road, obviously. CNC.
I want it now. No, don't wait. Between you and Dominic, you keep making promises you don't. No, I'm sorry, man. I just got super excited. The idea that Lightburn...
I have CNC machine experience.
Sure.
So I had one before I had a laser. So I want it, but I also understand the complications there.
Sure.
We would need a better preview engine, probably full 3D. We'd need better control of Z. We would need, or Z, depending on the part of the world you're in. We would need...
We forgive you.
A tool library that included, the diameter and length of a tool, the shape of the tool, things like that. So Vectric software has sort of been my go-to when I'm working with my CNC machine.
Yep.
And I really like the way that they present the user interface for CNC work. And there's a decent amount of functionality in Lightburn that has been influenced by or is paying homage to Vectric software. And some of it is exactly the opposite of the way they've done things, because there were a few things that just bothered me.
Sure.
But yeah, I would like to see Lightburn move in that direction. And we have a software engine that, does good work for vector manipulation, multiple file formats, loading, importing, exporting, that kind of thing. and the path planning is good. So making it support different types of machines now is just, the one missing piece. And of course, all of these machines have their own sort of specialty requirements. So as an example, when you're water cutting, you can't just do a straight plunge move.
Yes.
You actually have to do what's called a spiral plunge, because otherwise the water gets into the hole and just jets straight back up and goes everywhere. So you need to do things like spiral leads. And when you are vinyl cutting, you can't just do a 90-degree corner. Most of these machines have the blade at an offset, and it has to be, you actually have to go past the corner and then sweep. And things like that will have to be coded into the software and the path planning to make it compatible with those kinds of machines. Some of the machines will do that themselves. Some of them will require the software to do it in advance. And so there's things like that that we're kind of investigating to figure out, whether we can support it, how easily we can support it, and then whether those companies are going to be receptive to us supporting their hardware is another thing. So we don't want to get ourselves into any legal hot water.
Well, I'm super excited about that. And not to cut you off, but I was like, yeah, we're just going to keep doing the same thing, put functions in there. I'm telling you, I love the idea that Lightburn becomes kind of like the one-stop shop when it comes to CNC and like subtractive manufacturing. That to me is so super exciting. If I could apply my workflow that I have with the Emblazer to a CNC machine or to the vinyl cutter that's been sitting there that doesn't work only because the software is so old that I can't put it on a new piece of machine, and the software that I bought was like $180 and like they leveled up and it's another 180. It's like, oh man, I've got stuff that it could apply today. So I'm super excited about that. I'm telling you, Jason, it has just been a pleasure to talk to you here today and get a bit of a history. I mean, we work with Lightburn. For some people, they're going to be like, cool, I hit the buttons. That's all I want to know. But I know that for other people, they would like to understand some of the ideas, some of the thoughts, some of the workflows that came through. And, I'm so glad that we were able to do this and be able to kind of connect. Would you be open to coming in and hanging out on the Laser Livestream again, maybe talking more focus on some of the things that Lightburn can do?
Yeah, I'd be open to it.
Time
zones are a thing, and that might be fun, but
that's okay. I mean, we understand that because of the time zone issue, you can't be here live, but we do get we were able to make this work, and it was something that we were working on for quite some time. And it's one thing for me to present, but it's another thing for people to hear it from the horse's mouth, or in this case, Lightburn's mouth themselves. Anything you want to share with us before we head off?
I don't think so. I think we covered quite a lot.
We covered a lot, man. I'm telling you, it's just been really, really informative. And again, next time I'm using the software, I'm really going to look at some of the things that we've discussed, because you know what? I didn't realize that you had spent time and thought in the icons. The icon I like the most is the grouping and the ungrouping icon. The single guy and the multiple people. I'm like, okay, why is it like that? Now I understand. It's really, really cool.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
And look, on behalf of, I'm going to talk for myself, but also on behalf of a lot of people that I know, thank you so much for putting this out there. I know this is a project you started for yourself, but it really changed a lot of people's accessibility to use this software and to use this hardware more than anything else. Laser cutting, when I got involved in it, it was, go and do a university course to understand the mechanics of it, and then go and learn manufacturing software to get it to do stuff. And we did touch on it before, but the software has allowed a lot of people to be incredibly expressive. In fact, I just recently got an email from someone who's a grandmother who made a birthday present, which is so creative, and it was through using Lightburn and the Emblazer. And she openly says, she's like, I would never have even thought about doing something like this. But
cool.
It's due to that accessibility. Jason, thank you so.
I like hearing stories like that. I really do, because we've had a few of those ourselves, where people have sent emails saying just thank you. Like, I had a laser for 5 years, and it's been a piece of junk, and I've hated using it, and so on and so on. And then I got your software, and the clouds parted and angels sang and things like that. And sometimes people are a little overly effusive, and I think, yeah, they're laying it on a little thick. But other times, like, I have genuinely seen people, like you're saying, like a grandmother or somebody
Right.
who has a learning disability or a physical impediment of some kind,
Sure.
like that kind of thing. And has always found the software for these machines to be difficult to work with and cumbersome. And we've gotten emails from people like that who say, thank you for doing this. I love what you've done. You've made my laser from a tool. This is a direct quote. There was a guy who created a coffee making machine called Mugsy. His quote was, you made my laser, you took my laser from a tool that took me all day to use and turned it into a tool that I use all day.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
and yeah, and just like that quote will stick with me to my grave, because it was perfect. But it was, it's things like that when people come up to me at trade shows or maker fairs or things and just like, oh my God, I love what you're doing. I want to shake your hand.
Sure.
Okay, I mean, I wrote software, but okay,
but it's more than that. It really truly is. The software opens up a possibility that wasn't there before, and pairing it all the way, to foundational stuff. I'm a great believer that we have everyone in many different forms has to be able to express themselves, and making is definitely one of those areas. And being able to express yourself, to go and spend a couple of hours on Lightburn and become proficient enough to go, cool, I don't have to go with the manual and I don't have to hold my mouse over things to understand it, but I can just go there and start creating. That's where making becomes an art form. And part of that is definitely the ability to take what's in your head and communicate it to the machine to make what's going on. And that is Lightburn. Absolutely. So thank you so much on behalf of myself, and I'm going to talk for the community here. We love working with Lightburn. Part of the live stream is going through the different functionalities and talking about them and showing examples. And I'm personally grateful for what you've done. It's a bonus that I get to speak to you directly about and tell you to your face, as opposed to just, hey, I really like what's going on, thumbs up, and that's it. But keep it up. I'm so super excited about the idea of Lightburn expanding into other, subtractive manufacturing, CNC type machinery. And we look forward to seeing what you develop within Lightburn, and also having you back here on the Laser Livestream to talk about everything and more.
Cool. Well, thank you. I'm glad that people are happy. Honestly, that's what it comes down to for me, is if I've made somebody's life a little easier, made it easier for them to use their hardware, made it more fun for them. I mean, that's what I'm doing this for.
Awesome. So, thank you so much, Jason. We'll talk to you real soon.
All right, thank you. Okay, bye.
A big thank you to Jason from Lightburn for taking the time out to share some of his history and innovations behind his software. If you like this interview, check out these interviews right here to take a deeper dive into creating with your laser. Until then, go make something amazing, and we'll catch you real soon.